Karl Schweitzer, welcome to INSEAD Knowledge.
My pleasure being here.
And it's good to see you here at the Alumni Healthcare Summit. Medtronic is a big sponsor, so I guess we should say thank you for that.
Well, it's our pleasure to be here.
Now, you are the Vice President of the Neuromodulation Division of Medtronic, and your area of responsibility is quite large. Europe, Central Asia, parts of Russia, and the
All of Russia, actually, yes.
All of Russia,
yes.
So it's huge. Mm-hmm. But apparently, in looking up something about neuromodulation and the company, apparently neuromodulation is where you're really focusing your research and development efforts for the future. Why are you doing that, and what exactly is neuromodulation?
Yeah, I would put it that way. I think we have just coming out of a strat plan, which we do once a year to revisit where the growth potential is going to be the next 5 years across the corporation, and neuromodulation came out as the #1 area of growth for the next 5 years. And I think that's also then, of course, triggering R&D dollars going into the areas that are most promising and where we see growth coming from. Neuromodulation, I think, is interesting because it serves the neurodegenerative diseases of the population, which by definition, coming with increased aging population, you will see that there's more need for those therapies. Plus, it's a highly underpenetrated therapy if we're looking at several areas of neuromodulation.
Well, is this something that's embedded that really hits the nervous system to prevent you from doing something or prevent one of your organs from doing something?
Actually, how it functions is there's two different parts to it. Mainly one is the stimulation part, which you do with implanted devices, which are about the size of, a pacemaker, same size, a can of about 20 cc, and with leads attached to them, so they do stimulation of the nervous system in the backbone, but also deep brain stimulation where you actually do stimulate the brain. And the other part is the area where we implant pumps, which are about this size, and they then do apply pharmaceuticals, drugs, against pain and movement disorders. So the big two areas are movement disorders and pain. The third area that is now growing dramatically is the area of incontinence treatment through stimulation as well.
I should also point out that Medtronic was actually invented the first implantable pacemaker.
That is correct. We back in 1949, when Medtronic was founded, it was the first independent pacemaker, i.e. not linked to a wall outlet, electrical wall outlet, but could work autonomously. And then, of course, and this was still on a cart, and then it moved on iterations into becoming smaller and smaller. And 22 years ago, actually, the idea was, well, if we can stimulate one organ, which is the heart, why don't we move up one level to the brain? And this is actually how neuromodulation came into being, through deep brain stimulation in collaboration with a French doctor, Professor Benabit in Grenoble.
How hard is it to get FDA or European Union approval? I asked because I realized that both entities have just given their approval to the treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder.
OCD, yes, OCD, as we call it.
Okay.
The approval of those devices is becoming more and more difficult, simply because evidence-based medicine is the rule by which we have to live, which by definition also means you have to bring more and more data, and more data mean also that you have more clinicals mean longer delays, which is a challenge for us because we're living in an environment where product life cycles are between 18 and 24 months. So any delay in bringing new therapies to the market, of course, also mean that competitive pressure is going to increase by the time we can launch it if there are delays in the launch. Now the OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is a very important step for us because it's the first ever device that is commercialized for psychiatric disorders. We're now moving away from movement disorders into behavioral change through a device that is being implanted.
Could you treat something like schizophrenia somewhere down the road with one of these devices?
Potentially, yes. I think what we are looking at is over time moving into new areas in deep brain stimulation, because that would be an area for deep brain stimulation. We started out with essential tremor, Parkinson's disease, and dystonia, are now into obsessive compulsive disorders. The next level will be depression and addiction. And then beyond that, you could, of course, also go into such disease stages as schizophrenia, potentially.
There is everywhere pressure on containing costs. Pharmaceuticals get hit the hardest because they seem like the big bad guys. But what about devices and that sort of things? I mean, governments are working around the globe to keep down prices. What does that...
I think we are not spared. And of course, the bigger you are, and we happen to be number one in that space, the more visible you are. And the price pressure is definitely a key element that we do see coming. And as soon as we now think about moving into a new therapeutic area or expanding existing indications, we have to have healthcare economic endpoints on our mind. So before we even consider going into that area, which clinically could be of interest, we need to evaluate if from a reimbursement point of view in the major markets where we would like to go into next 3 or 4 years, the reimbursement will pay for those therapies. If that's not the case, then we need to think twice if it is actually viable to go there.
Because it would be expensive to pay for it.
Well, it would be out of pocket, or you would have to get special funds. In some areas we do get those, but if you look at the investment that you need to put behind that, and then you look at what potentially a NICE in the UK as an HT, a Health Technology Assessment Organization, is going to say, this is going to have a huge impact on the adoption of that therapy. And we already have a hugely underserved market with existing therapies. So that's another trade-off we need to make. Are we going to invest more in existing therapies, or are we going to move into new therapy?
What happens to your heart business now? That seems to be very big. It should be making you a lot of money, but you're putting the emphasis on neuromodulation.
Well, I would say that there still is going to go a significant investment into the cardiac space as well, cardiovascular space. I think in terms of the importance of growth, neuromodulation has such a low penetration but very high interest in the potential to bring people back to productive life. That growth is not only in, say, the BRIC countries, but also in the United States and in the European Union very high. Whereas if you look in cardiovascular disease, you have a very high penetration in the United States, fairly high in most of the European Union countries, and not so high in the developing countries like the BRIC countries, Russia, India, China, and Brazil. So you still get growth. And by the sheer size of those businesses in cardiovascular, of course, the incremental growth means a lot more absolute dollars than in neuromodulation, where we do have very high growth rates, but the absolute dollar amounts are not that high.
Now, you arrived clutching a little blue book. So tell me about this book.
Yeah, I think, again, we just touched upon changes in healthcare. And we have, I think, as an industry, and you mentioned pharmaceuticals, I think healthcare industry in general, been underreactive for a long time. I think we have not been trying to influence the environment in which we live, shape the environment in which we live enough. And we think that policymakers also need to better understand what innovation can do for them, can do for healthcare. We need to go away from the notion of that healthcare is a burden. Health is wealth. Health is something that is important for the prosperity of our societies. And so we want to explain to policymakers that innovation actually can, on one hand, save costs by being more productive, and on the other side also prolong productive life of patients. So we've created a white paper, it's a blue book, Health is Wealth, endorsed by the Commissioner for Healthcare and Industry by Verheugen and Commissioner Vassiliou, which just talks about going toward a European lead market in healthcare, where we need to also apply more of the market forces. We need to understand what the potential is of innovative medicine and devices, and at the same time also make sure that money is wisely spent on the hospital level, but also from the payer side, from the insurances. So it really starts at those who make healthcare policy to give them the information they not always do have, and then also bring it down to patient associations to make them more vocal and be part of the whole thing, because after all, this is where we need to end up. We need to have health, better health for more people in going forward. I think the debate, what's the right percentage of GDP being spent on healthcare, is the wrong debate. The debate needs to be around what is it that we will be able to do in order to keep our populations, which is by definition are going to age in many of the major economies over the next 30 years, to keep them productive longer.
Thank you very much, Karl Schweitzer, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.